Ladies and gentlemen, Rex Bear Leak Project, how the heck are you? We have Matt LaCroix with us. Thank you for your patience. We are going to get into the golden ratio, the matrix code, the clandestine controllers that we hear very little about, and what we do hear about seems to be disinformation oftentimes. Now, Matt put together a great book called The Illusion of Us. He has had several podcasts on Leak Project that have tons of views. So people really enjoy to hear what he has to say, as well as I do. That's why he's back on the Leak Project. He's going to show several slides to put all this information together. Really excited to have you on the show. How the heck are you?
Hey Rex, it's awesome to be back. I always enjoy our conversations. Thanks. I'm doing great. I'm definitely the busiest I've ever been in my life, though. I'm trying to, as hard as I can, in a timely manner, finish the newest book that I'm working on called The Stage of Time. And it's proved to be quite a challenging project because I decided I wanted to not only just have my words in it, but I wanted it to be an ancient history, ancient writing reference guide, so that if someone is saying, well, I want to go quickly read the Atrahasis or quickly read, parts of the Enuma Elish or the Emerald Tablets or the Legend of Britannia or a lot of different other writings included, they can go and find the page number that's on, and they can go find the most accurate translation right there in front of them without having to try to go search the internet or all these different challenging means where we're not always sure if it's the best translation or where the source comes from. So I've been working hard to try to get that released, but I wanted to get a show in here so we could get back to some of these great topics.
Awesome. Well, let's rock and roll, Matt. I'll let you go ahead and share this slideshow presentation. And the neat thing about this is the way that you can do the microcosm, the macrocosm, the as above, so below. You're connecting science and ancient tablets. You're integrating it all together. So let's rock and roll.
So I wanted to start by really looking at the high level, and then we're going to work down through. So I wanted to connect this as a teaching that looks at, like you said, everything from the science end to the spiritual end to the ancient history evidence end. I wanted to try to connect them all together in 1 hour. And I sometimes I have to quickly move over some topics that I would love to just discuss for an entire hour in itself. But we're going to try to squeeze a lot in here. So let's do this. I was young. I spent a lot of time out in the woods, out in nature, hiking, fishing, a lot of things. And I didn't understand what was being told to me in school and taught to me about how nature was just this completely random set of circumstances in nature where a tree and a plant and storms and galaxies and everything was just random. It was just based on these Darwinian theories of survival of the fittest, and whatever is able to survive going through different time periods then rises above the rest, and then that's what's left over. And it felt so empty to me. It felt so unconnected, and I just couldn't find any purpose in it. And at the same time, I was being brought to Sunday school to learn about modern religion through Christianity, and then, like I said, I was at the same time, along with that, I was in school learning about all these basic science principles about just being unconnected and random. And it just didn't make sense to me, because when I was spending a lot of time outside, when I was walking through fields and seeing flowers and seeing, shells on the beaches of oceans and seeing storm systems, it all connected. It all followed this pattern. And I knew deep inside that there was more to it than we were being told. There was more to the design of everything around us. And that goes down almost a very spiritual path. I'm not going to say a religious path. I'm going to say a spiritual path, because I think religion has become something that is not based on what the original intention was. And that was this connection between mind, body, and soul, of understanding every aspect of what goes into becoming more aware and conscious of everything around us. Because if you try to look at it on a purely scientific level, or you try to look at it on a purely spiritual level, if you try to separate those things and not connect them all together, you're going to be missing a big piece of this. That's why I think we need to connect all these things together to really understand all of this more accurately. So
I'm also thinking 369, Tesla.
yeah, some of these amazing people in history have discovered what we're about to talk about, and they realized, not only how to harness free energy, but how to literally read and map the language of the universe itself. And so what I'm showing on the screen right now is what's called the golden ratio. And that is something that is the ultimate proof, along with, it's a golden ratio is based on a mathematical equation. So the golden ratio itself, along being a mathematical formula, is this Rosetta Stone that gives us the means to understand the universe itself. Okay, and it is the proof behind what we call an intelligent design. Now, I'm not going to be going down what a lot of people, modern religious, looks at God in terms of how a lot of people see it around them. I want to come at this from what the ancients taught us and what the spiritual side of energy, and really looking at this in every way possible to understand it better. And so when I was out in nature and noticing all of these ratios and all these patterns, it became apparent that there was more to the story than we were being given. So I began on this quest to try to figure out, well, what is the truth? What is the truth behind our reality and this framework of our existence that we live in? Is it just random, or is it based on this intelligent design? And it became very apparent very quickly that there was this design behind all of it. And it was the proof behind the fact that there is this, whatever you want to call it, there's some kind of entity or whatever energy, we don't even know, but there's some kind of intelligence that designed this reality and universe we have around us. Now, when we look at, some people will look at, say, nature itself or consciousness, and they'll say that is God. And I would agree with that, because and I don't even really always I don't like to even use the word God, because I think God is a very polluted term, much like a lot of all these other terms that have become very polluted. I often use the words, combination of source or prime creator or whatever it is. But the fact is, there's so much proof all around us showing that there is this intelligent design behind the universe, which really, when you look at it, you can actually, you really should call it a multiverse, based on all of these layers of possible realities that are all put on top of each other to basically allow every free will archetype expression that can happen, every timeline that's possible. When we look at the past and the present, a lot of times we don't see that as being a connected cycle, but it really is. And that's why some people say time itself doesn't really exist in the way that we perceive it. And so one of the most amazing things about it is if you learn about this mathematical design behind it all, and you say, and you do some digging on it and you look at it, you'll find that physicists have actually estimated, by looking at the ratios that exist between everything, between dark matter and the balance of elements, and the ratios and the interactions between electromagnetic energy and all of those things put together, everything that makes up the framework of the universe around us. And I'm going to use the word universe just to keep it on a basis that it's not have to jump back and forth, but really it's not a single entity at all. So getting back to it, physicists have actually looked at all of those combinations of what makes up this universe around us, and they found, it's shockingly found, that the percentages and that go along to make this work, they're so perfect that if it was even off by less than 1%, this minute amount, if it was any different than the ratios that exist in right now, it would all collapse. None of it would work. You'd have galaxies crashing into each other. Nebulas would never form stars. All these things would just never happen if you didn't have this perfect design behind it. And that's where we look at, well, what is that design? Well, it's known as the golden ratio, and it's based on a mathematical equation of 1.61. And then that then follows this pattern that goes over and over and over again on itself. And that's what we see everywhere, okay? And that's why we find it in storm systems, and we see it in flowers and shells and galaxies and just everything around us in nature itself. And that leads down this big question of saying, well, if there's an intelligent creator behind this entire universe and everything that we can perceive, then where does that creator entity, where did they exist? What is their reality? And I think that that really is the most fundamental question that exists in all of mankind, because that's the highest level that's possible. Where does this being exist that they're outside of this entire created universe? It keeps me up sometimes. I think about it all the time. It's fundamentally amazing, but in the end, I think that that's something that we're not going to know for a long time, or potentially ever know, because it's so far above us that we would have to reach such a high intellect level and such a high conscious level that we're talking about something that's, far into our future if we're able to make it that far. So I want to go from talking about this intelligent universe to talking about what's in it, because there's a lot of misconceptions that are out there. And one of the biggest ones I constantly get is, well, because NASA has lied about a lot of things, they've lied about how much life is out there. They've lied about what's on the moon, what's on Mars, all of these things. There are a lot of lies. I completely accept that. And it's frustrating. But the thing is, so many people go too far. Maybe it's a combination of them just not being outside of a city where they can see the universe above them, see our galaxy right above us. When I go out at night, I'm lucky enough to live in a very rural part of Maine. I walk outside on a clear night, especially during certain times of year when I can see different parts of the sky, see the entire arm of the Milky Way. It truly changes your perspective when you can see everything around you without this light pollution blinding everything that exists right above you. So when I'm going through this, I don't try to follow these misconceptions and lies. I try to follow just whatever we have actually objective evidence for to look at. And so the first place to start is I want to give some perspective we're going to go from the high level of, like I said, talking about the intelligent design, going all the way down into, extraterrestrial life, all the way to what is the proof on our Earth of what happened in the past. And, how can we incorporate that to understand our consciousness and spirit better? So I want to start by reading a really profound quote from the physicist Michio Kaku. And it's one of my favorite quotes that really helps us to better understand the universe around us. And he says in one of his quotes, 1 in 200 stars has habitable Earth-like planets surrounding it. That means that in our galaxy alone, there are 500 million stars with Earth-like planets going around them. That's huge. So when you look at the night sky, it makes sense that someone else is looking back. And that's exactly how I feel too. When I'm able to walk out and I have a clear sky, I stare up at Sirius, or I stare up at the Orion's belt, and I wonder what kind of planets are rotating around those stars, and what's found there. Is there someone there that's just staring back, that's asking the same thing? And it is truly a profound thing to think about. And when you do that, you take yourself out of these often very mundane lives that we live, where we just go to work, we go home, we fall asleep. We often don't take into account the wonder of where we are, the fact that we're on this planet that's flying through the Milky Way Galaxy, on this solar system that's just one of billions that exist just in our galaxy alone. It is truly a staggering thing to try to wrap your head around. And that's and so when you break it down, there are so many planets that exist in our solar system and galaxy alone that potentially could have life, that there are more than if you would add up every single grain of sand on all the beaches of our planet. Every single grain of sand. So when we look at that and we try to wrap our heads around that number, it's staggering. It's almost too hard for us to even comprehend.
Let me add to that real quick. Yeah. It's very fascinating when you were showing can we go to the slide before this for one moment? Now, when I had Cliff High on the show a few months, he's been on the show many times. He's somewhat of a regular. Uncle Cliff was talking about how our sun is like a comet and it's pulling the planets behind it, even though they're orbiting. It's like a spiral.
That's
and when
right.
I look, and then when I looked at I had another guest on the show that put together a presentation showing the planet and the sun and the solar system and the way that it orbited, and it was a spiral motion. And that was Wayne Steiger that came on the program, and he showed that, which correlated what I think Cliff was talking about. Identical, the way that it moved is identical to these images. And I'm thinking the spirals of life. And then you talked about the multiverse and how it's all, it connects at the quantum level, yet it's just continuations of infinite opportunities. This is amazing.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rex. Thanks for bringing that up. People don't often perceive that we're moving, that we're part of, that our solar system is moving. And it's in that, like you said, we're being pulled by a combination of primarily our primary sun and Jupiter as well. And we're flying through space in this big spiral that's going into the center of our Milky Way galaxy. And that's a great transition into understanding where we are. Right now, we're moving right into the galactic center of the Milky Way galaxy, where the energies are at their highest point. So if you were a civilization like the Mayans and you were trying to track where conscious levels could be in the future, you could look at where the energy was based on zodiacal changes and based on where our position was in the galaxy. And you could basically pinpoint when these leaps in human consciousness would begin. And so right now, look where we are. We're nearing the center of the Milky Way galaxy, and we're transitioning to the time of Aquarius, and all this chaos is on the planet, where it's this war of information, where, we're being a fake news is being identified, and everyone's pissed off and looking at the state of what our reality has become. And we're now moving back towards wanting to reconnect to a lot of the things that we lost in the past. And so I want to give you some perspective. We're in the Milky Way galaxy, okay? And in the Milky Way galaxy, there are billions of Earth-like planets and other solar systems, and that's just one galaxy alone. In the universe itself, in the known universe that we can see, there are billions of galaxies. So try to wrap your head around billions of galaxies with billions of planets in each one. And our nearest galaxy, known as the Andromeda Galaxy, is 2.5 million light years away. So if we were able to travel at the speed of light, just to give some perspective, the speed of light, the fastest known direct linear speed that we can come up with, they would take a person, let's say hypothetically, it would take them 2.5 million years to reach it. I mean, to me, that is a staggering number. And that's why I often then think, okay, well, what about something like a wormhole? Some of these shortcuts in space. And that brings me back to thinking about stargates and thinking about, well, what was the gateway of the sun for in Tiwanaku? What was the purpose of some of these gateways? And I often think, well, if you were some kind of an advanced superior civilization, you wouldn't be stupid enough to try to just be linear minded, going from one place to another. So that's what I want to get into. That's what I want to start talking about, is looking at, well, what are these possibilities that exist, and what really is around us, right?
Yeah, and I want to add something to that just real quick. You made me think about the show that I saw the other day called The Alien Code, where there was this satellite sent from the future, and this guy decoded it, and then the Men in Black showed up, the literal Men in Black. And this is the best interpretation I've seen of these Men in Black yet. And they are these ETs that have no linear time. So when they're observers, and they were asking this guy questions like, why did you decide to decode this? He's like, well, I did it for the money. And they're like, well, did you even worry about the implications? And they just didn't understand. And then they started talking about humans are stuck in this duality, in this loop of remember, forget, remember, forget. Yeah. And it was just fascinating. And also when you brought that up about, it'll take millions of years to get to another point, and then you said something after that, it really sparked interest in my mind of this universal synchronicity that many of us have been achieving lately. And I think that was spot on. So I just wanted to.
That's a great point, is And I agree with that. I think a lot of shows like that are trying to give us these pieces of truth, showing the idea that there may be beings that don't perceive time like we do. And they're part of our reality, but we're not able to understand how they view our reality because we're outside it. We're within it. We're part of this small little bubble of reality that in many ways we've been kept in that small little bubble. So it's not even necessarily this natural course of events that, oh, here we are and we got here through the means that we should. I think there is a lot of suppression. There's a lot of things that have been hidden about what really is out there. And so that leads us in perfectly to say, well, everyone says, well, where are they all? Right? Then if you think if there's so much life out there, then where are they all? Well, that's a really complicated question because it's not just this very simplistic answer that you can give, like, oh, well, that's why. There's a lot of complicated things in it, and I want to bring up some of those certain paradoxes that have been brought up about that. The most famous is called the Fermi Paradox. A lot of people might be familiar with that, and I want to bring that up because it basically connects into this conversation really well. And so the Fermi Paradox was named after this physicist named Enrico Fermi, okay? And he points out that there's this apparent contradiction between a lack of direct evidence of extraterrestrial civilizations on the Earth, while at the same time, they factor in the high probability that they do exist in the universe. Now, before anyone jumps all over me with that statement and be like, well, there's plenty of evidence for it, I want to just point out the fact that that's the linear way to look at it based on not really noticing what's sort of all around you at the same time. But the way that derives saying that there's a high probability comes from my favorite equation of all, which is known as the Drake equation. And that's where that factor of saying there's a high probability comes from. So Francis Drake came up with this famous equation that I highly recommend people check out. It's one of my favorites of all because what he did was he looked at, okay, what are these needed ingredients for life based on what we know? And combinations like how close is a planet to, or based on mathematical percentages and equations, how many planets would be close enough to their sun where they'd be found in this Goldilocks zone, right? Not too cold, not too hot, just enough for life. And then how many of those places have all the needed ingredients for life? Are they able to have oxygen? Are they able to have nitrogen? All those different things that go into life, at least carbon-based life as we know it. And what Francis Drake came up with is that even if you were to look at it at a high level and say, well, okay, so then what if some of these there was civilizations that had then arose on some of these planets somewhere out in the universe, and maybe they became sophisticated to the point where they didn't follow the laws of balance and they ended up destroying themselves, right? Maybe sounds familiar. Or maybe and they factor in all those different things. And in the end, even at a really pessimistic way, when you look at just the lowest probability way, there are potentially millions of civilizations that still should have made it. That still, according to the Drake equation, would have reached an advanced state.
Can I jump in on that real quick,
yeah.
Matt?
Yeah.
Did you hear the interview that I did with Wallace Thornhill? He's one of the pioneers with the electric universe hypothesis.
I did not hear that, actually.
The reason I'm bringing that up is what you said about all of these different civilizations that we're probably missing. Well, he mentioned, and I think this was fascinating, and it totally correlates with what you're saying right here in the Fermi Paradox, is that the best place to find life, in his opinion, advanced life, similar to ours, would be towards red or brown dwarf stars. Most of the stars in the universe, or at least in this galaxy, are red and brown dwarf stars. And if you go back to the possibility of thousands of years ago, before the last ice age, approximately 12,000, 11,500, 12,000 years ago, there was a cataclysm that actually ripped the veil off of our Earth, and Saturn at one point was a brown dwarf, and Venus somehow got ejected from the gravitation of Saturn and Jupiter, causing it to get close to our planet, ripping the veil of part of the ozone, I guess, or the atmosphere, to where now instead of seeing just like this purplish hue or this reddish hue, this constant hue, like no night, no day, it's just the same. And then that gets ripped up when Venus comes and does this flyby and all these plasma discharges and such. So with that being said, I had somewhere that I was going with that. When you brought up the possibility of life being on all these other places, have you heard that theory before? And do you think that that would make it very plausible that if there are these planets out there that are close to brown dwarf stars and red dwarf stars, there's like a similar environment where they don't see all the stars and planets like we do, because they've got more of an atmosphere, and that would also make it difficult for the communications that we're sending out to be picked up. We wouldn't see them and they wouldn't see us because of this additional veil.
Okay, let me speak on that. That's a good point. So the first thing, based on my understanding, is a lot of, and I agree, especially if you look at, you and I have done shows on Planet Nine talking about how when you look at when Pioneer probe was sent out and it found this basically dead old ancient star way out on the edge of beyond our central solar system, making our solar system actually a binary. When you look at that, they say it's a dead star, and they say it's probably either a brown or a red dwarf. So what does that mean? What's the point of that? Well, I think a lot of brown and red dwarfs are older stars. They're much older, and therefore there's been a lot more time for whatever planets are around them to develop, or at least have more time to survive and get through whatever the challenges that they faced, based on environmental and climatic and all these things that go in. And so if that may be true, that if you target those older stars, you're probably a lot more likely to potentially find an advanced civilization. But this is where I want to go with this, because I equate the Fermi Paradox not to the distances, the massive distances that exist between these locations, because again, that's a linear-minded viewpoint to look at. I equate it more to this state of human consciousness that we exist in right now on the planet, where we've been led down this road of violence and war and low consciousness and low energy, and not understanding the balance of nature and the universe around us for so long, that we are almost this primitive human species that really doesn't belong in that state. We belong in this higher energy state of being part of everything around us, and yet we're forced and kept in this lower state of energy with this perspective that's so polluted by all the things around us that coerce us into conditioning through spending all of our time working and watching reality shows and shopping and all these things that are quite silly if you then think about what we could be doing with our time, what we could be doing with our own awakening of learning about everything around us. So I think that based on the fact that we are in such a low conscious state, that we are getting back to what essentially you see in shows like Star Trek, this idea where you can't contaminate a civilization or introduce anything to it, because you could really disrupt its timeline. I think that instead, the way to really look at the Fermi Paradox is that instead of all that life just being out there, but it's not part of our reality, I think we're being looked at and observed from all over the galaxy. I think that when life, if you look at what goes on with all the different dimensions and how life develops and becomes aware and then changes the state of energy, there's this path that always gets followed, according to what we understand at least, which is beings that are highly intelligent and have this ability to connect to a higher consciousness. They eventually ascend to become telepathic and then connecting to everything around them on a non-physical level, and eventually they would then reach the point where they could be non-physical. And so because that's what essentially the upper dimensions are. The third dimension is the physical 3-dimensional world. That's That's the only dimension where matter is physical. If the second you go above that, you go to the fourth and fifth and sixth dimensions, you're talking about non-physical realms. So that means that if consciousness, these higher Akashic states, if they exist in higher dimensions, which I believe they do, then that's simply what that says is we're almost just finding our way back to that point. Because I do think that we had this major step back based on a lot of the things that happened in our past that pushed us back way behind where we actually should have been. And a lot of things were lost because of what you said. There was cataclysms, and we're going to go into that caused a lot of knowledge in ancient civilizations to disappear. Okay. So and that's going to lead directly into basically saying, well, then what's the purpose of us being here? If we're this incredibly highly conscious, energetic being that has the potential to reach states of higher energy that are non-physical, and we could potentially have an infinite potential future, then what are we doing? What is all this? Why does this seem like this criminal world where duality has ruled this place for so long? And that's why I'm going to bring up a quote from a really a great mind, in my opinion, that more people should become aware of if they're not. His name is Christopher Hitchens, and he was an award-winning British author and researcher, and he's written and co-written and been involved in over 30 books and magazines. And he basically has been part of the mainstream, working with a lot of high-profile figures, but at the same time, he constantly questioned and was basically providing his own viewpoints. Before he died, he gave two really great quotes that I want to mention because I do really agree with a lot of what he says. And he says, "My own view is that this planet is used as a penal colony, lunatic asylum, and dumping ground by a superior civilization to get rid of the undesirable and unfit." And so when you look at, well, what is the purpose of us being here? Well, you can see that when you look at the teachings from ancient Egypt, this whole idea of the ancient gods like Osiris connecting to these underworld rulers, Thoth, where they were determining who could ascend and leave this place and leave this state of energy so they wouldn't be reincarnated back in the system over and over again. Well, that's based on this idea of us reaching our highest state of energy. That's it. And the way to do that is you have to learn you have to go through these difficult challenges of becoming a good person and being compassionate, and then at the same time learning about everything around you, learning about nature, learning about science, learning about astronomy, learning about spirituality and energy. If you're able to connect all those things and you're able to follow this certain path, then you're able to essentially graduate. You graduate from this teaching earth. But the reason I say that is that would then imply that the whole point of us being here is to essentially learn and grow and become better. Like we're all in this prison of, and I don't like to call it a prison, but it's like we're in this place where we're here because of either our past actions and the decisions we've made, or I even think that some beings that are here may be here because they need to for a reason. So I think there's a lot of things going on, but Christopher's point really makes a lot of sense. And he goes on to say that mankind is supposedly the most highly developed species on the planet, yet it surprisingly is unsuited and ill-equipped for Earth's environments, harmed by sunlight, a strong dislike for naturally occurring foods, and ridiculously high rates of chronic disease. So it's amazing to me that if we were to look at this on a purely evolutionary Darwinian model where we're nothing but just apes, that then somehow some ape maybe ate, some psychedelic mushroom, and then, oh my God, they had these giant leaps, and boom, this segment of the ape population became advanced humanoids. I don't see that the case at all, based especially on like what Christopher said. If we were supposed to be this survival of the fittest, we would be much more adapted for this planet. We would have probably hair covering our bodies to keep us warm. We would have totally different ways to deal with the world around us. If you take the average person, okay, and you were to just throw them out into the wilderness, most people would die within a week. Most people would never survive, and yet we're supposed to be this species that's highly evolved for this planet. So, but in reality, what I really see is that we're more of the species that is a guardian here to learn and grow with our environment, rather than just being like anything else, any other animal that's here. It is fascinating if you consider that before mammals were dominant on the planet, we had these giant lizards running around, some that were as tall as buildings. It's almost inconceivable to consider that if certain cataclysms and perhaps even decisions had not been made, that dinosaurs would have been the ones who continued to rule this world. And I think that's a really lost thing that a lot of people don't think of. And it's an example I use a lot, because when I'm talking to people about a lot of these secrets of ancient history, and like we're about to talk about the Anuna, who were these? If we had visitors in the past, who were they? And I always get back to the idea of, immediately most people would reject information they don't understand if they don't have knowledge to then back up and weigh that information. And it goes along the lines of dinosaurs. Back in the day, if you were to try to tell anyone who had not seen bones or any of the evidence about giant lizards roaming around the planet that were as big as houses, they would just laugh at you. They would completely laugh at your face. And then at the same time, you take that group of people and you lead them into a room and you show them these enormous bones and you show them all of these skeletons. And all of a sudden, what they think of as being impossible and crazy, all of a sudden doesn't really seem that way. And that's how I consider our ancient history. When you look at our ancient origins, and when you look at the stories that were told by cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia, all the way across to the Hindu cultures of India, and all the way across to places in South America, you see that's not what they say at all. And in fact, they give a far different history than we've been told. And that's what I want to run into right now, because there have been writings in the past that ancient writings that have tried to explain what occurred long ago. Because frankly, you look at the idea we just said, humans, Homo sapiens, all of a sudden had this gigantic leap where their brain doubles in size and they become super conscious and they become aware of everything around them. And at the same time, they have these chakra centers of energy inside them that are perfectly tuned to the visible light spectrum. None of that can just be completely random in nature. There's a design there, just like there's a design behind the entire universe and reality itself. That's the whole point, is that none of this is random. All of it is part of this connected plan between what I think is the idea that advanced beings could become so advanced that they try to act as gods themselves, because they end up perceiving this golden ratio mathematical design, this Rosetta Stone behind everything in the universe, and they recognize the fact that there is an intelligent designer. So some of them would then act like they are that creator, they are that god. Is if you had advanced beings that could have already ascended beyond just needing a physical body, if you have advanced beings that are millions of years advanced beyond us, if you were to have them come here and they saw some primitive hominid like a Neanderthal or Denisovian, they would potentially be interested in playing the role of gods. And I think that's exactly what's happened. And so in all these ancient stories, there's so much pollution behind these words like Anunnaki and alien. But if you go and you directly look at some of these ancient translations that have been done in the late 1800s by George Smith, where he took the Atrahasis, from the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, Iraq, and you look at how they directly mention the Anuna, and they're talking all about the descriptions of when they came here and what they did with altering human genomes and all of these things. You see that instead of this unconnected and lonely place where we're all alone, it's nothing like that. It's just this hierarchy system of duality. That's really what it comes down to. And so the real question comes down to when you look at it and you look at all these influences in the past for these civilizations that, like the Sumerians, who all of a sudden just out of the blue, they understood mathematics, this language of the universe. They understood agriculture, complex laws, astronomy, all of these things. And they say clearly that that information was knowledge was handed down to them from gods in heaven. And so we got all these polluted terms like, what is heaven? Well, it's just higher dimensions. Well, what is hell? Lower dimensions, the underworld. That's how we should look at all of this stuff. And then certain figures who have played certain roles in our reality that were then demonized, and because of being in the underworld, and this idea of hell being this evil place, when it's really just this location where soul incarnation occurs, this place of energy. And so what I want to do now is I want to read a quote from the second Emerald Tablet. And what the Emerald Tablets are these ancient writings from this being named Thoth, okay? And he has connections back to Atlantis with all these different incarnations that these beings have played, where some of them try to spread knowledge to mankind, while others decide they want to deceive mankind and try to keep them in a lower state of energy. It's this duality play between either spreading knowledge or trying to keep a being in a lower state of awareness and energy. And so in the Emerald Tablet the second Emerald Tablet, Thoth goes on to actually describe where these ancient beings came from, or at least what their origins are. And I want to read a quote from that because it's one of the most profound sets of readings to understand far back in the past that doesn't exist anywhere else. Okay. So in Emerald Tablet number 2, Thoth states, far in a past time, lost in the space-time, the children of light looked down on the world, seeing the children of men in their bondage, bound by the force that came from beyond. Knew they that only by freedom from bondage could man ever rise from the earth to the sun. Down they descended and created bodies, taking the semblance of men as their own. The masters of everything said after their forming, we are those who were formed from the space dust, partaking of life from the infinite all, living in the world as children of men, like and yet unlike the children of men. Then for a dwelling place, far neath the earth's crust, blasted great spaces by their power, spaces apart from the children of men, surrounded them by forces and power, shielded from harm, they the halls of the dead. Side by side then, placed they other spaces, filled them with life and with light from above. Builded they then the halls of Amente, that they might dwell eternally there, living with life to eternity's end. 32 were there of the children, sons of lights who had come among men, seeking to free the bondage of darkness, those who were bound by the force from beyond. So it really is profound when you go through that and you look at the fact, well, these ancient beings came here, they found this realm of earth, they blasted into the center to get to this underworld of energy, to control this soul incarnation cycle here, so that they could be the gatekeepers of it. They essentially could decide what of these children of men, who could ascend and who had to stay here. It really, to me, it's profound because it completely changes our understanding of what these places they referred to as the Abzu was. They called the Abzu the underworld, deep within our planet or in the lower half of it, and they call the Apsu the sun, the outer. It was these references to these different states and these different dimensions. And so he mentions that they call themselves the children of light. And I think that's a direct reflection to the fact that these are ancient beings that are, some of them feel like they are essentially doing the work of this intelligent prime creator. They are the beings that were from the very beginning. They are, the light beings. And light is always associated with this ascension of all energy.
Matt, let me add to that. Let me add to that real quick. Do you think that these beings of light could actually be from the sun?
I think that they recognize the utmost importance of what the sun brings, that it is, in many ways, I think that they consider the sun to be a direct reflection of this God creator, that it is what provides life to everything. It is the fundamental single thing that exists, anything that is in the universe. These suns are like little mini gods who provide life to everything around them. And so I think them being the children of light is them trying to pretend they're like the children of God, like they're the workers of this prime creator.
And that's a great analogy, and maybe both. I am wondering now, because of all the research that I've done with the Emerald tablets, Hermetics, the Sumerian tablets, what's her name? Blavatsky, Helena Blavatsky, and the Secret of All Things, or the Secret Teachings. And when she breaks down those stanzas and talks about the original beings coming without form, the formless ones, and then those that became into form. And then if you take the astrotheology aspects of the New Testament and Jesus maybe being the sun of the solar system, the only way through the Father is through me, like a stargate.
There's a lot of questions still that we don't understand about our solar system and about the effect that the planets and the energy all coming together in a certain way has. And I think that's one of the reasons why this crossing of energy is always talked about, this crossing all the time of this crossing within us, this mind, body, and soul crossing to create this trinity of perfection where we ascend. And then there's also, I think, this crossing aspect of a combination of the fact that Jupiter is the only planet in our solar system that does not actually orbit around the sun. Jupiter itself actually shares this collective orbit to control the rest of the planets. That's why Jupiter has always been thought of as the great controller and balancer of our solar system. But yeah, you're right. And it brings up these questions about, like, well, who are these beings? We have been shown all through history that there are these archangels, there are these angels from heaven, these fallen angels. All of these terms have been used all throughout time, and there's stories written about them, all these parables and all of these things. And we're made to believe that all of it's not real, and that all of it's just interpretations of us understanding lessons, and that us understanding the cosmos. But I think it's a lot more to that. I think that really when we look at the influences that have occurred throughout the past, and if you look at how perfect our reality is to essentially keep us in a lower state of energy, none of it's by accident. And furthermore, none of it, I don't believe that humans could ever come up with such a devious set of rules in reality to control human energy in lower states. It is far too sophisticated in itself. In fact, the sophistication is what gives itself away, in my opinion. And it makes a lot of sense when you start reading a lot of the Gnostic stuff, talking about how this being that was known as Enlil, who's on the right, who was put in charge of higher dimensions and the demiurges of mankind. And the fact that we have to accept the idea that some of these beings may not think that we deserve the gifts that we have. We don't deserve these gifts of creation, and these gifts, and what I mean by creation is the ability to create. That's what we have. We are creators here. We're creator gods who just don't know it. And so we're these incredible beings who are in this physical body, and that our true form is on a conscious energetic level, and that we're essentially trapped in a reality that we don't really belong in. We're trapped in this reality that's been created here because of certain jealous beings that don't want us to ascend to a higher state, because they don't think that we deserve these gifts in the first place. And Enlil, you can read, that's not just me saying that, you can read about that directly in things like the Atrahasis, where it goes on to talk about how, some of these beings wanted to wipe off mankind off the earth because they thought it was an abomination to our world, because we were so unbalanced. They wanted to wipe us clean and start over here. And I think that if you look at the fact that civilizations all across the planet all had this connected knowledge and all had these influences, where all of a sudden these huge leaps occurred in our genome, as well as civilizations arising, and then cataclysms came through and then destroyed them, and then we had to start over again. I think that cycle has happened several times. We don't even know how many times it's happened. But the point is, all that we have left that describes these great beings that were providing the knowledge of the past to then prop up and propel certain civilizations, and then others would control them. I think that's what we've seen all throughout history. And so what is some of the proof, right? I got to go through this quick because I think I'm a little behind. What is some of the proof of these connected civilizations that it influences all over the earth? I think one of the best pieces of evidence can be found in Bolivia. So in Bolivia, not a lot of people know about this, but there was a very important discovery was made in 1958. There was a farmer basically plowing his field in Bolivia, and he uncovered this very strange bowl that's called the Fuente Magna bowl. And inside that bowl, he found cuneiform writing inside that. Now, if anyone knows what cuneiform writing is, that's essentially the writing that was from Mesopotamia and in places like Sumer. That was their type of etched out writing, where it's the most logical and intelligent way to leave a message. Because if you try to write something on something just with pen or paper or whatever, it's only going to last a short amount of time. But if you etch something into clay or stone, you can essentially have it last for thousands and thousands of years. And that's exactly what happened. Here we go. This farmer stumbled upon this remnant of the past that somehow survived, that's connecting and showing evidence that there once were these influences or these lost civilizations that were either influenced by the same source or were even possibly connected, through places like Atlantis and all these things that we've been made to believe are just a myth. And so what happened to these megalithic civilizations? Because that's what they were. Anytime you see megalithic building, precision and megalithic building, and this vast knowledge of the stars and everything around us, you see these lost civilizations. And we've been given a date that civilization on our planet arose around 5,000 years ago and became sophisticated and non-nomadic, except for the fact that things like the Sumerian king list, cuneiform tablet from Mesopotamia, clearly states how long ago some of these ancient kings ruled here. And in some cases, it was, well over 10,000 years ago. So we have to completely re-examine the history of our planet and what occurred. And so some of the evidence that proves these ages and proves these lost civilizations can be found in Göbekli Tepe, which is in Turkey. Because what's so important about Göbekli Tepe is that it's been radiocarbon dated to 11,600 years. That's essentially when they think that it was the civilization built it. Now, what's so incredible about that, and you see that all these things end up connecting. That's what's so profound about this path of truth, is that if you were to then look at the Timaeus and Critias with what Plato said, describing the destruction of this lost civilization of Atlantis, he gives the same date of 11,600 years ago. Then all this time later, archaeologists are uncovering this and they're dating it, and they get the same date. So if you had a civilization like Atlantis that was being destroyed by cataclysms, earth changes and tsunamis and all of these things that were happening, the people there would leave. And that's exactly what they did. They left and they went to different parts of the planet and they jump-started these civilizations. Because if you look at the archaeological evidence in Göbekli Tepe, you see that it truly was nomadic tribes before that point. And then all of a sudden, this quick leap towards understanding astronomy and mathematics, just like we see in Mesopotamia. So it's this story that's echoed all across the planet, where this civilization that built that was then later destroyed as well as part of these, what you could call the Younger Dryas cataclysms, which was this rapid end of the last ice age. I always say it, but I have to because it's so important. But where I am right now in Maine, there was 1 to 2 miles of ice above my head only 12,000 years ago during this same time period. So if you have ice, it's miles deep across the entire northern and southern hemispheres, miles deep. And because of it, there's so much water locked up in ice that ocean levels are 400 feet lower. And you have all these civilizations that build along the coastlines, like off of Egypt and Alexandria. And then as you get these cataclysms and earth changes that occur, you get this rapid melting of the oceans, and ocean levels go up 400 feet, submerging everything. And we lose probably 80 or 90% of all of those civilizations, because most of them were probably built along the coast. And so we have these small remnants that were inland that were not totally destroyed. Now, in Göbekli Tepe's case, it's truly amazing because not only do they have these 20-foot tall megalithic T-shaped pillars in a circular fashion that describe some of these epics and events that happened. They show evidence in these depictions of these cataclysms during the Younger Dryas, maybe a comet strike that hit the northern ice caps. And they show that, but they also show these different epics of when stars were moving through, and they describe how they knew that the destruction was coming for their civilization. And so what they did is to protect and seal off these records, and I'll go into what those records are, but to seal off and protect this in the future, they deliberately buried it under a mountain of dirt. In fact, it was such a high hill of debris that they buried it under that the name Göbekli Tepe in Turkish means pot-bellied hill. So they had buried it under all this stuff so they could seal and protect it, so that when these cataclysms came through with flooding and all these things that happened, it could be preserved underneath for the future. So what were they preserving? Well, when you look at these T-shaped pillars, you see these strange animals on them, these birds and these scorpions, and you're like, it doesn't make any sense. What are they doing? Well, what they're really showing you are constellations and zodiac changes. Each T-shaped pillar is showing you these different time periods where they were tracking and monitoring the heavens. And it was like a celestial library. It was and I don't think that we've even remotely uncovered all the secrets of Göbekli Tepe, especially considering that more than 50% of it is still underground. We've only just begun to uncover this, but it gives us this record of when these cataclysms occurred.
Was an article that I got linked to just a few days ago that I think is from April of last year. And they started pouring concrete around it. And when I read the headline, it made it sound like they were pouring concrete over the entire thing. However, then they're not, thank goodness. With that said, though, what they are pouring concrete over, is it for restoration, or are they covering up certain things and using we're just restoring it so that you can go look at it?
That's a great point. And the same thing happened with the Sphinx. Sphinx in Egypt, in Giza, there are tunnels that have been found. You can see it right on the head if you look at images. It's undeniable. I've made a video on my channel that talks all about it. And there are tunnels all around the Sphinx. Anyway, one of those tunnels was in the front of the right paw of the Sphinx. And what happened? Well, they came through and they boarded the entire thing up, and they said it was for restoration purposes. Interesting, right? Same thing happening at Göbekli Tepe. They're making what was like a parking lot or something nearby, and they ended up damaging the site because they're pouring concrete over it. I mean, this is not exactly what you call, prime treatment for these ancient sites. It's like they don't want the secrets to come out. They don't want everything rewritten. So that religion has to look at this differently, and science and archaeology, that everything has to be rewritten and turned into this hunt for truth to really see what happened, because there's so much evidence that's proving to the contrary.
The cleanup crews, I like to call them, these cleanup crews that find parts, out of place artifacts, skeletal remains with elongated skulls, giants,
Caracas, Peru. Yeah.
Now, these organizations, these groups, from people that I have talked to that have had great conversations with those that have, I wouldn't call them spooks. They're not spooks, but they work with organizations that you might say have spooks with them, and, kind of like contractors and stuff. And before any of these alphabet agencies were even officially set up, there were these groups that would go around, and if somebody found something in their backyard or at a river, a cave or something that wasn't supposed to be there, technology or artifacts, whatever, then they would find a way to get those. And now, where are they? Well, we can only speculate on that. But it's very interesting how they have to control the narrative.
And just like in Egypt, with all of these tunnels that have been found using sonar, and they just board them up and block them off. Go look at what happened with Tomb of the Birds. That's part of that Egypt video I made. And it talks about how this team that's not part of the mainstream discovered this new entrance to these underground tunnels. And when they were going deep into it, they never got to the end of it, but they had to go out because the day was ending. It was getting late. So they had this entire plan set up where they're going to go back and find out where that tunnel went, connecting underneath the pyramids and stuff. They went back, bring in extra gear and everything, and the entire thing was walled up with a thick fence, like one of those ones you have in parks or in cemeteries. And they were given no access to the site, and they were blocked off. We're seeing that all around the world. And you mentioned a good point is, I think that there's two places in the world where they're directly covering up these elongated skulls, these large skeletons, and a lot of probably cuneiform tablets and writings from the Mayans and the Aztecs from being taken from when Cortez was there. All those things I think are being kept in two places. They're being kept with the Smithsonian, and they're being kept with the Vatican archives. Two places where these things are being stored and held back so that we can't get all this evidence that floods us, so that we will unquestionably see the truth. And that gets back to, well, what is the truth? Well, these ancient civilizations I mentioned, Göbekli Tepe, nearby in Cappadocia, Turkey, there's this location called Derinkuyu. Now, if you look at the official narrative for what they say was who built it and everything, they say that this was built during the Byzantine Roman era for Muslim Arabs during the Arab-Byzantine wars to hide it, okay? And they base that purely on the fact that when they were in there, they found evidence of them being there. So they said, oh, there it is. They built it, and that's how old it is, and that's the purpose. Yet, it's so much more complicated than that, because in Derinkuyu, you have essentially what is an entire underground city. It is this incredibly sophisticated place that took potentially years to build. We don't even know how long, but it is this set of rooms that connects underground to all these different, through air shafts and all these means where they could survive underground for very, very great amounts of time, where animals could live and they could connect through these different passageways. And they had these enormous circular doors that could swing across and block off anything from getting in, completely sealing them inside. And what that tells you is, whoever these people were that did this, they were trying to survive something for an extensive period of time. If you had severe climate changes like we did, if you look at Greenland ice core samples, you can see that our climate shifted dramatically 12,000 years ago during this same time period, right? It's the proof behind it. It shows it directly. And at the same time, we had these underground cities built where they're surviving. Meanwhile, across the world, the Hopi talk all about in their stories about how they were led into caves during the floods by what they call the ant people. It's the same story echoed all around the world, where the only place you could potentially survive some of these events was underground. So that's where it takes us there in Kuyu, where they found they could house more than 20,000 people. And I really encourage people to not only look at photographs, but go look at some of the diagrams that have been made on how extensively huge these tunnels and rooms are. What they're shown to the public is only a small piece. It actually connects to the largest underground network in the world. So that gives you evidence that talks about lining up with Göbekli Tepe, the ice core samples, and all of these ancient tablets that talk about how this disastrous event occurred at the end of the Younger Dryas that led to what was much of mankind being wiped out, just like the Atrahasis says, exactly like the Atrahasis says. And at the same time, in our history books, we're told this really, really empty narrative and linear narrative that, none of that stuff happened. If human civilizations were nomadic, and then 5,000 years ago, boom, they just started to become more civilized, and that's it. That's the whole story. Meanwhile, if you were to actually sit down and look at all this evidence, it overwhelmingly supports that these ancient, they're called antediluvial or pre-diluvian civilizations once existed. And so we're at this point where it's become a war of information, like you said, where they're sending civil wars into places where all of these ancient artifacts are, like Syria and Iraq. You can't even go there now. And they're some of the most important places that connect back to some of the first civilizations on the planet. And you can't even go there now. Meanwhile, ISIS is running around destroying all the artifacts, and they're pouring concrete over them at the same time in places, and then hiding all this evidence in the Smithsonian, Vatican archives. It's like we're being It's like there's this lid on the pot that's being held and it's boiling, but they're just trying to hold on as long as possible because they know that all that evidence, if it came out, it would completely contradict and change our perspective for how we view everything in our origins and history to even just the timeline of our planet. We have to understand that we're moving to this new zodiacal period of Aquarius, and what I mean by that is there's this balancing seesaw of duality that always gets followed here, and that's based on a combination of several things. And one of those things is based on some of these influences of these ancient beings and what they were. Was that zodiacal period of Pisces, is that going to be ruled by war and negativity and lower energy? Yes, and that's exactly what happened. Whereas this dawning of Aquarius that's been celebrated and sung about by what people think are just hippies, when in reality, the dawning of Aquarius represents this time period where this veil is going to be lifted and humanity will finally see the truth of both their infinite energy and potential, as well as all the truth of what occurred in the past. And it's going to fundamentally change everything in reality. People are not going to want to do the same things that they did before. They're going to want to find substance in their life. They're going to want to find purpose based on the fact that they finally maybe are led to understand that they're not just their physical body that dies and then that's it. It's this eternal darkness. That's not the way it is at all. It's more of this situation where here we have this lifetime, we can do anything we want with it. And it's up to us to decide what we want to do with that knowledge and with our potential. So Rex, I just want to say thank you for that great discussion we had. And I just made a website recently. I hope people check it out. It's thestageoftime.com. And that's the name of the new book. I named it after that. It's my author website essentially. And you can send me emails through there. I also have a YouTube page at Matthew LaCroix. So check out some of my work if you're interested in more, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. So thanks again, Rex. I really appreciate having some of these deep conversations to understand things better.
Matt, you're a legend, man. I think you're great. I always love you coming on the show. Let's do this again.
Hey, thanks so much, Rex. I really appreciate it.
Right on. And folks, click the link for Matthew's YouTube channel. I've got that in the video description box. He has over 20,000 subscribers, some great YouTube podcasts, and his book, The Illusion of Us, is available on Amazon. Make sure to click the link for that. Be the change you want to see.